Hello, all. This is Jeremiah, audio engineer for the Fire Rescue Wellness Podcast. And AZ says download the latest PDF prior to listening to this episode. Thank you very much and happy listening.
Thank you for joining me on the Fire Rescue Wellness Podcast. I'm your host, AZ. I find the research and resources and then provide the fire service with the so what, now what, to ensure the health and well-being of every member of our profession. Together, let's thrive. Hello, everyone. It's AZ. Welcome to the Fire Rescue Wellness Podcast. Today, I am doing a solo episode. I had a guest scheduled who wasn't able to make it. So apologies in advance. I have been sick for, a week now. Homegirl doesn't sound good. But anyway, this is a sort of a last minute recording for me. So as usual, I reached out to my best source of ideas for podcast episodes, my friend Paul on Instagram. And he came back with a great topic as usual. Paul wants to know more about the mobility training that my previous guest from last week, Andy Scott, talked about. And I think this is a great idea. So I recently started my grad program. I think probably most of you know that. But prior to that, I was working with a lot of fire departments on health and wellness. And I, along with my previous guest, Luke Peterson, instituted a sort of a morning mobility program at my fire department too. Now that I'm in graduate school, I don't do anything without keeping data and tracking research. And I mean, if I have a conversation with someone, I'm trying to figure out how can we study this? But at the time, we were just trying to help people. We were just trying to make sure that less people got hurt on the job. And so we didn't really keep any data. We didn't really do any statistics, but anecdotally, when we instituted our morning warm-up and mobility sessions, anecdotally, injuries decreased, and they decreased by quite a bit. That said, we also had some chronically injured people either retire or go off the job, so that could be part of it. But we actually, for I think a couple years in a row, got some refunds from our workers' comp carrier because our injuries went down. So it is something that can be definitely impactful. And then Andy Scott talked about he's doing it in Plainfield now, specifically before doing training on the drill ground. So let's get into it a little bit. Paul was like, I searched on YouTube. I couldn't find either one of these accounts that you guys talked about. And they are private accounts because they were done exclusively for our fire departments. But there's no reason I can't help you guys do this for yourself. The other thing I want to tell you is that I'm a huge fan of mobility work. It is not what I am well known for. And so I want to give you some resources right off the get-go. Previous guest, Jen Hostler, is a mobility queen. So give Jen a follow. And then Dr. Jamie Mraz on Instagram. She is an Army physical therapist, mobility queen. I'm just here to give you some basics today. So the first thing we want to think about when we're doing mobility is we want to take a really a 30,000 foot view at it. Why are we doing mobility work at all? And in the fire service, we can examine it from the lens of injuries. So in the fire service, the most common injuries are knee, lower back, and shoulder. I think it's in that order. Honorable mention, shout out to the elbow. Almost everyone has had or has currently elbow tendonitis, elbow pain, elbow dysfunction. So when we're looking at mobility, we want to look at these are the injuries that we are commonly exposed to, and what can we do to hopefully mitigate the risk of those injuries. So from a scientific perspective, I think it was Mike Boyle. Can't say for sure. Probably should have looked it up before I started recording, but I think it was Mike Boyle came up with this theory or I guess it's not even really a theory. It's factual. The body is built in a stacking system of joints, and those joints alternate between mobility and stability, or at least they should. So when you look at the ankle, we want to have good mobility at the ankle. But at the knee, we have a very stable joint. It's a hinge joint. Technically, there's a little bit of rotation at the knee, but not very much. So its main movement is just a hinge joint, and it's very stable. Then we get to the hip. We should have a tremendous amount of mobility at the hip, whereas the lower back should be very stable. When we move up to the T-spine, we should have good mobility, but the neck area is very stable. When we look at the shoulder joint, we should have good mobility, and the wrist, we should have good mobility, but the elbow joint, much like the knee, should be very stable. When you look at it under this lens, you can see that if joints that should move well don't move well, then the joints above and below them might have to compensate. So for example, if your ankle doesn't move well or your hip doesn't move well, then the victim of that poor movement might be your knee. So your knee might have to move in ways that it doesn't really want to move just because the other joints aren't sort of pulling their weight. They're slacking off and making the knee move in degrees of freedom that it just doesn't want to move in. And you can look at the same thing too up at the lower back. If the hip doesn't move well and the T-spine doesn't move well, then the lower back is going to be the victim. There is movement at the lower back, but it's very few degrees in each direction. So you can imagine if your hip isn't moving in the way that it needs to, you might have to, again, I'll use that word, pick up the slack at your lower back. And when things move that don't prefer to move, that's when we get pain and dysfunction. So how can we combat this? At first, let's talk about if you are an accountant, or if you are a bus driver, or if you're a school teacher, or name any civilian career, you are still under the physiological demands of your job and laws of your body. So if you're a school teacher, you still need movement at your ankle and your hip and your T-spine. But if you're a school teacher, you're probably wearing comfortable shoes, loose pants, whatever, a blouse or a blazer, whatever. You are not wearing boots that are designed to protect our feet, bunker gear that is tight around the hips, and an SCBA that sort of locks the movement of your T-spine and probably your hips as well. So the PPE that we are wearing is working in opposition of what we actually want in terms of movement in our body. So as firefighters, we need to fight even harder to keep this mobility so that we can move well and hopefully avoid injury. One of the things that previous guest Jen Hostler talked about was something called CARs, or controlled articular rotations, CARs. And CARs are fantastic because they help not only identify range of motion, but also improve range of motion because we're gaining strength by doing these exercises called pails and rails, progressive and regressive isometric contractions. That piece of it, all of those things, CARs, pails and rails, so fabulous, but also higher barrier to entry than some of the exercises I'm going to talk about today. Because with the CARs, you have to first identify the range of motion that is lacking and then figure out the exercises, the isometric exercises that are going to improve it. So it's a little bit more difficult. Is all that information available on YouTube? It sure is. But for today, I'm going to primarily talk about mobility exercises that aren't necessarily CARs or pails and rails. That said, you are probably going to be much more successful if you implement some of those exercises. So back to the real problem or the real challenge. How do we combat the propensity of firefighters to get injured because joints that should move well don't move well? Well, one of the things that we can do is, like Andy stated, they have a dynamic warm up and mobility session prior to tower training days. We at my fire department had a dynamic warm up and mobility session at 7:30 every morning. So after shift change, after we gave our reports, ongoing, offgoing, after the rig checks, the first thing we did was our mobility session. And our administration identified the fact that changing clothes multiple times during the day was a barrier to entry. So we were allowed to come in our workout clothes, do our rig checks, and then get right into the mobility session. So that is something, again, lowering barriers to entry is always going to create more success for people. So we're going to focus on moving joints that should move and focus on practicing stabilization in joints that should be stable. So the first thing I would have everyone do is just a short activity to increase blood flow, whether that was walk around the station, whether it was, jumping jacks in place, marching in place, whatever, just get the blood flowing a little bit. And then we would do some soft tissue work with foam rolling. Now, foam rolling is fantastic, but I want you to understand there are people out there that say things like this: foam rolling breaks up scar tissue. Well, it takes thousands of pounds per square inch to quote unquote break up scar tissue. There's no way that you can put that amount of pressure into your body with a foam roller. But what it does do is feed your nervous system novel information. So think about this. When you smack your thumb with a hammer, what is the first thing that you do? Most people either shake their hand or they squeeze their thumb. And that helps modulate the pain response because you're giving novel input to the nervous system. Foam rolling is the same thing. Are we kind of going after those areas that I call them hot spots? So areas of increased pain, or maybe we could say the tissue quality in that area isn't as good as the tissue quality in other areas. Yeah, we're going to go after those areas, but we're not breaking up scar tissue. We're simply giving novel input to the nervous system, which in turn can help open up increased range of motion temporarily. It's not a magic fix-all. You are not going to become more mobile 10 days later because you foam rolled today. But if you foam roll first, you may be able to open up increased range of motion for your mobility work during that session. So increase the blood flow, get some foam rolling going. And then we want to focus on the areas that we know should be mobile. And so we want to do some work on the T-spine. We want to do some work on the hip. And we want to do some work on the ankle. But I try to do this systematically so that people aren't hopping up and down 100 times during this session. Now, if I'm your coach and you're telling me that improving your body composition is your goal, I'm going to get you up and down off the floor as many times as I possibly can during a session because I'm going to increase the expenditure, the energy expenditure during the session. But if I'm working with a firefighter, we're working on mobility, we want to try to make this a logical progression so they're not hopping up and down, time and time again. So I actually start in the quadruped position. That would be hands directly underneath the shoulders, knees directly underneath the hips on the floor. So that's quadruped position. And then I want to work on some spinal articulation with something like a cat and a cow. So I'm sure you've seen that maybe in a yoga YouTube or something like that. But what you want to focus on with this cat and cow is that most people have one area of their spine that they tend to articulate at, and everything else is stiff. So instead of just doing your cat and cow with hinging, we'll call it hinging on the same vertebrae every time, I want you to really consciously work on trying to create that curvature or the inverse curvature, as it were, in different areas of your spine. So we're going to do some cats and cows, but we're going to focus on getting mobility throughout our entire spinal, all of the spinal segments. So cats and cows, maybe 10 or so of those. Working on breathing while you're doing that can be very, very helpful, downregulate your nervous system. After the cats and cows, we're going to work on some specific T-spine rotation. And there's a lot of ways to do it, but I like to lock out the lumbar spine so it can't help. And so what I have people do is rock back, put your buttocks basically on your heels. So now you're going to put your arm up as if you were getting arrested or going to prison. You're going to put one arm up, and then you're going to circle that elbow down below your body and open it up as wide as you can. We're going to do maybe 10 of those on each side, but this is going to emphasize moving through the thoracic spine. Right now, if you're driving in your car, you probably are thinking, what in the world are you talking about, lady? I got you. I'm going to put together a PDF. It'll have links to the exercises. So we worked on being able to articulate throughout the entire spine. And then we worked on some T-spine rotation. Now we're going to work on just a little bit of many times firefighters feel pain, discomfort, tightness in their groin area. And so we're already in quadruped position. Let's hit it really quickly. So you're going to stay in that quadruped position, but now you're going to shoot your right leg out. It's going to be an abducted position with your foot on the floor. And now you're going to carefully and slowly rock your hips back towards your heels. About 10 of those on each side. So that's your quadruped rock back with your leg abducted. Now, let's work on your hip mobility a little bit, and then let's challenge it a little bit. So the first thing I want you to do is stay in that quadruped position, and you are going to do some hip circles, almost like a fire hydrant, if you've ever seen that exercise, but we're going in as big of circles as you can accomplish while still being pain-free. And we want to make sure that we're moving through the hip, not the lower back. So there's a couple tricks you can do. You can put some sort of like a ball on their lower back. So if they're moving it, it's going to fall off. You could put a half foam roller. You could put all kinds of different things on their lower back, or you could just watch. But another thing you could do is lock your body against the wall. So one side of your body is locked against the wall, and you are moving the other side of your body. Regardless of what you do, we're going to make those circles as big as possible, as completely pain-free, and try not to move your lower back. So now we've got those hips moving a little bit. Let's challenge that movement. And so now I'm going to bring you to a position. It's called tall kneeling. And that would be both of your knees are on the floor and you are basically standing tall. So it looks exactly like if you were standing up, except now your knees are bent and you're on the floor. You're going to come from the tall kneeling position to a half kneeling position. So you're just going to take your right leg with that newfound hip mobility you just discovered and lift it around and put that foot on the floor in front of you. So now you could think of this like the proposal position. So one knee is below you and one knee is right out in front of you. Nice 90-degree angles. And now you're just going to bring yourself up off of the floor. And then you're going to reverse that back down to the half kneeling, back down to the tall kneeling. Now you're going to do it with the other leg. So do that maybe 10 times on each leg, but practice trying to keep your body tall and not rotate at your hips other than the leg that's moving. And definitely don't rotate at the lower back. After that, we're going to address some movement in the shoulder. And this is one place I do like to use those shoulder cars. And again, this is as big of a range of motion, pain-free, that you can possibly do without moving the rest of your body. Again, I'm going to link this all in the show notes, but we're going to make some big, huge circles with our shoulders. And then we're going to address those ankles, because remember, the knee usually gets injured because the ankle and the hip aren't moving like they should. So I'm going to take you into a push-up position, and then I'm going to have you rock your hips way back. So now you're in an inverted V, or you could call it a downward dog if you know what that movement looks like in yoga. And now you're going to push, alternating your right and your left heel down to the floor. You should feel a really tremendous stretch in your calf, maybe even in your Achilles, but maybe 20 of these alternating. Then you're going to flip over onto your back and you're going to do something I call a hamstring nerve glide. And so you are going to keep your left leg straight. You're going to hug your right knee up to your chest, and then you're going to bend and straighten your right leg. So it's going to come up above your face and it's going to bend, up above your face and it's going to bend. 6 or 8 of these on each side. And then hop up off of the ground. You're going to need a mini band for this. So they're about 2 inches wide. Oh gosh, I don't know what the circumference is. They barely fit around your ankles. So you're going to put that mini band around your ankles, and then you're going to do just some muscle activation strategies for your lower body. So we can do something called a crab walk, where you are stepping side to side. We can do a monster walk, where you're taking steps forward and backward. We can even take a lighter band and put it around the instep of our foot, and we can march in place, challenging that hip flexor area. And then you can take that mini band and you can put it around your wrists, and you can do either a push-up position or against the wall position. And I call them clocks. So your hands are going to be at 3 and 9, just like you're driving with your palms down. And then you're going to take your hand out and back in, and you're going to take it up and back in. You're going to take it down and back in, all of the different angles of the clock. So again, none of these exercises are difficult. In fact, if you've ever been in rehab, you may have done some of these exercises. None of them are difficult. This isn't going to take you an hour. Once you figure this out, you can get all of this done in 12 to 15 minutes. I promise you. But just doing a little bit of warm up and a little bit of mobility makes an incredible, incredible difference in how you feel, how you perform, and then hopefully in your chances for getting injured. Can we prevent injury in the fire service? No, we cannot. It is a high risk, high impact job, but we can do things that will hopefully soften or mitigate the risk of getting injured. So again, I want to shout out to Paul. Again, he always comes through with a really, really good suggestion. I'm going to sign off because now I need to go make a PDF resource for you all. I'm going to put Jen Hostler's episode as well as her Instagram in the show notes. Dr. Jamie Mraz, I'm going to put her Instagram in the show notes. Go give those ladies a follow. They are tremendously, tremendously helpful. Both of them have programs that they sell to enhance mobility. These are not firefighter specific programs, but they don't need to be, because everyone needs to work on the mobility of their ankles and their hips and their T-spine. Also, back to that poor, honorable mention elbow. I'm having a guest on, I hope, in a few weeks. I'm manifesting it now to the universe, but he has seen a tremendous amount of elbow tendonitis in his population. He's trying to figure out, is it the gear? Is it any specific things that they're doing? Is it the way they're working out? All I know is that it's an epidemic in the fire service, elbow tendonitis, and it's crippling. And so working on I didn't include any wrist mobility in this particular warm-up, but addressing the mobility of your wrists also makes tremendous sense. I think that's all. 22 minutes. Not bad. I hope you guys have a really, really great week. If you ever have questions about an episode, don't drive yourself nuts trying to find a resource. Paul was looking for these YouTube stations or YouTube channels, and he didn't drive himself nuts, but he could have just asked me and I could have told them that they were unavailable because they're private. So if you ever have a question, make sure and reach out. I will get back to you as soon as I can. I think that's all. I'm going to drop the mic and go take some cold medicine. AZ is out.